All right. So when finding neurotypical artists to partner with, what are your biggest challenges? Is it hard to break the stigma to find artists that don't find themselves to be superior in craft or abilities when planning collaborations with people with different abilities? We didn't run into this at all. I think um, one thing that's really great about artists is they tend to be uh, pretty open-minded as a stereotype, and I think that they were really excited. I think that the only thing that we ran into is when we started having studio sessions where the artists would work together. There maybe was a slight kind of learning curve just to or kind of settling in period where maybe some of the artists the neurotypical artists maybe felt a little less comfortable. And I think that just comes from this fear of not wanting to say the wrong thing or not knowing what to say. But I think that the more kind of people in general sit and, allow that feeling to pass, then they are rewarded by having these interactions that they might not have otherwise experienced. And that's really special and cool. Um, do you ever have children come in for open studios or meet the stage artists to help inspire young people with disabilities? We have had quite a few kids come to art exhibitions, which has been really fun, and we've done some during kind of like uh, First Friday kind of open studio type things. We've had kids come in with their parents and meet the artists, and so that has been really fun. When planning group themed exhibitions, is that something that is collaboratively decided upon by stage artists, or is it determined and then the artists find ways to express themselves around that theme? Um, Typically, Katie, my partner, and I sort of pick a theme, and then the artists contribute to that theme. And sometimes we might pick a theme based on the fact that you know we have a lot of artists that have been creating a lot of music themed art, or we've noticed that we have a ton of like food inspired work. And so what are we going to do with that? We have two artists now. We're working. Our next exhibition is going to be a pair of Texas based artists. And both their work is like really bright and jovial and lively, and so we thought that they really kind of embody the spirit of spring, and so that was kind of what we did. And they were already sort of we were sort of inspired. Our theme was inspired by their work, so there's a little bit of chicken or the egg, but typically my partner and I pick the theme and then the artists contribute work. As we know, the US school system has a tendency to teach art to students in a way that simply requires following directions, coloring within lines, cutting and pasting shapes, etc. When you begin working with an artist that may be stuck within a preconceived notions of how art should look, how do you get your student to break away from these preconceptions and explore their own artistic voice? I think this kind of ties back to the idea of what we're exposed to and what we consider to be inside, the kind of acceptable realm of what art looks like. And I think as teachers, it is so beneficial to introduce students to alternative voices, as much as I think we've all seen, the same sort of examples of pieces over and over in our elementary school art classes. And so wouldn't it be cool to expose more students to artists that are making work that are neurodivergent or do have disabilities? Just like we have in recent years really started having conversations about making sure that there's visibility for other marginalized artists like Black artists, female artists. I think that the same consideration should be paid to artists with disabilities. And the more that we start to show what other work can look like and really celebrate that, I think the less preconceived notions we'll have about what art should look like. Lucy mentioned in the video and also mentioned in the reading that teachers and other support persons that are in students' lives should support what the student is making. Are there times where students ask to collaborate with other students and or teachers? What would that look like? What that look like when it comes off showing off a piece or marketing it outside of the pandemic? In a pandemic, how would that work if they wanted to work together? So this doesn't happen so much at Sage. The artists, are pretty content to make work that is their own. They want to make work that is their own. We have had a couple of Zoom kind of open studio sessions where we invite an artist from the community to kind of lead participants, both neurotypical and otherwise, in a prompt. So we had an open studio where it was draw yourself as a professional wrestler. And so that's kind of the closest that I can approximate to like working collaboratively. I think that, I think that it's important to, credit both people and really explain what that process looks like. If it is one person is drawing and the other person is coloring it in or whatever that looks like, just being clear in that explanation. In the video, I heard that there are no teachers at the Sage program. If you were to invite teachers into the Sage program, how would you go about introducing them to your system, and what would you have them do to support the students? Or would you have them teach a lesson or two, or would they just be there for support? Would you allow the teacher whom you invited to be permanent, part-time, or a guest in your program? Again, probably the closest thing we've had is we have had those open studios. So we had an artist come in to do the wrestling one, and we have an upcoming one that is going to be where our current show is all about nostalgia. And so, and we have a comic book artist from Minneapolis that's going to come, and she does a lot of like kind of early 2000s, 90s themed like comics about fashion. And so it's going to be draw yourself in your favorite fashion from a bygone era. And so usually kind of the way that that's worked is they will provide like a prompt and create sort of an example or a mood board. And then it's just kind of an open free for all, use whatever materials you want, interpret that however you want. Partially because of funding restrictions. As I said, my partner and I have just started to pay ourselves. We're not in a position to bring anyone else into the program. Again, we're not looking at what we do as a school or as teachers. So rather than students, these are artists, and rather than teachers, we're facilitators. So that probably is just kind of a different model than what Sage is. Does Sage Studio have any plans to expand in the future? I think the freedom and independence that this studio gives and encourages these artists to have would be beneficial to people with disabilities everywhere. When I think of studios for people with disabilities, I think of exactly what you described: instructors who hold artists' hands and guide them. It would be nice to see Sage's approach to assisting artists with disabilities on a wider scale. Yeah, and again, I think there are some amazing examples of folks doing that, and certainly studios that inspired what we are doing. So you're in luck. There are lots of places that are already doing it, and you could be, if there's not already one in Denver, that could be a niche you could fill. What are some of your favorite, most rewarding moments from starting and working at Sage Studio? There are so many. I think all of our exhibitions have been so much fun because it feels sort of like the actualization of our mission, which is to create an egalitarian community where people with and without disabilities are just hanging out and enjoying art and talking about art. And so those feel like really great manifestations of that goal. It obviously was huge when one of our artists was asked to create merchandise for the Joe Biden campaign, just because of the scale of that and the visibility for an artist with a disability on that sort of national platform was really, really rewarding and cool. And I think just being able to write checks for kind of a lot of money to artists, and seeing their families' sort of attitudes around what they're doing change. I think that some of their families maybe initially don't perceive them as creating work that people would be interested in buying, and certainly not interested in buying for hundreds of dollars. And so when we are able to write checks and kind of validate that the work is important and the work is wanted, I think that's a really cool experience as well. Have you learned and grown personally from this experience? All the time. I feel like I'm constantly learning how to do things better, what I would do differently. I learn from my partner constantly. She's incredibly organized and she's very type A and I am not. And so I think we balance each other out really well. And then, of course, I feel like I learn from our artists all the time. I think I learn to relinquish control. I think I learned to see the world differently. And I think I hope that that continues for as long as I keep doing this. What is your advice for future educators when it comes to implementing similar ideas that you have at Sage in the classroom? I think we've touched on this pretty much, but yeah, just being open to process over product, and being showing diversity when you are showing examples of work, I think is really important. And also just really scaffolding when you're giving instructions. You know, I think when we think about accessibility, a lot of times we think about physical accessibility, like, is the paintbrush accessible? You know, are the chairs accessible? Things like that. But when you're working with folks with disabilities, you know, a lot of times accessibility means giving directions in a different way. Maybe it means giving visual directions with like printed out reference sheets. Maybe it means modeling something more than once. Maybe it means taking time in between each step to really explain something that maybe you wouldn't have thought needed to be explained. So I think sometimes those accessibility things are really important for us to think about. Once an artist with disabilities is part of the studio, how long do they partner with you? Is there a time limit for how long they are part of the program? No, there isn't. It's not like a school program where they graduate. Again, we have artists that have shown with us once and that's been it. And then we have Rick Fleming, who's been with us since 2017, and I hope will continue to show and exhibit his work with us for a long time to come. So there's no particular time limit or graduation demarcation. How many artists do you have at this time? Has this number changed with COVID? So I believe we have about 16 artists right now that we represent, and that number has actually grown in COVID. We have exhibited the work now of over 40 artists because we have, in COVID, since we were unable to do in-person art shows, we've been doing all virtual art shows. We are in our second virtual art show right now. And while that has its own limitations, and I certainly miss being able to get together and have a party, what it has opened up is the ability to partner with programs and organizations across the country. And so we've had the opportunity to show many more artists outside of Texas than we previously had before COVID.